Hello and welcome to Conquest Creations, and in today's video we're going to be covering my picks for the top 5 most powerful army lists in the new edition of the Middle Earth strategy battle game. Now, I gotta start this video by saying that this is pretty much just conjecture. The new edition's only been out for a couple of weeks and there haven't been that many big events, so we don't have the full picture yet, but these are my predictions on what I'm expecting to win a lot of tournaments. I'm gonna be revisiting this video in a couple of months' time to see if the list has changed at all. Another important thing to note is that at the time of making this video, we only have 6 scenarios, and the rulebook has said that there's gonna be 24. That means that when we have all 24, it might be a slightly different list again. But let's get into it with my initial thoughts of what I think the top 5 armies in the game are. Number 5 goes to Smow. Now, I talked about Smow in my previous video where I was talking about what models got the most buffed, and he was on that list. And it's no surprise then to see him in this list of the best army lists. Now, Smow is just a beast. He's fight 9, and now that heroic strike has gotten nerfed, he's a lot more consistent at having the higher fight than his opponents. He's got the ability to cast some magic. Most importantly, he has the Compel spell. He can combine that with his Breathe Fire special rule, which is an 18-inch range shooting attack. You choose one target, and if you hit, that model and all other models within 2 inches of it suffer a strength 10 hit. If it does a single wound to them, they're automatically slain unless they can pass a fate. Now that means that you can compel something into the right spot to breathe fire and do a lot of damage in one shot, so it's going to be a lot harder for your opponent just to spread out to stay safe. As there's going to be more monsters seeing the table, given that they've got buffed, being able to auto-kill them is also going to be really helpful. Smow also has a special rule where instead of striking his attacks normally, he can deal a strength 9 hit to every model in combat with him. This is going to be really helpful if he's being bogged down, and because his base is so large, there can be a lot of models fighting him at once. Smow has never struggled to kill the enemy. He's always been able to win battles by just obliterating them, pretty much. But where he always lost was on objectives. Because he was only one model in the last edition, it's pretty tough to hold an objective. Well, now he has the dominant 20 special rule, which means he counts as 20 models on an objective. And he has another special rule that says if he's in range of an objective, he automatically claims it no matter how many enemy models are around it. This is very powerful. And Smow is going to be able to play a lot more of the scenarios. In To the Death, he's got no worries at all, just kill the enemy. In Fog of War, he's got pretty much no worries at all, just kill the enemy, but make sure you kill the hero that you care about the most. In Destroy the Supplies, he's going to struggle the most, but if he can just kill the enemy and destroy one supply, then he could get the win. In Hold Ground, he's got absolutely no worries because he just needs to go and sit in the middle. And in Domination, his base is large enough that he can hold 2 objectives simultaneously, so then he just needs to kill the enemy and he'll be able to win. I'm expecting to see Smow at some top tables in some tournaments. Number 4 on the list goes to a list that's been talked about a lot, and that is MinMoral. The MinMoral army list contains the Witch King, Orc Warriors, Morannon Orcs, Trolls, Spectres, Orc Captains, Morannon Orc Captains, Taskmasters, and Ring Wraiths. So it's got a very good coverage of models. The special rules give you some defense against armies that cause terror, but the most important one is the one that gives the Blades of the Dead special rule to Orc Captains and Orc Warriors. With Blades of the Dead, you strike your wounds against the enemy's courage rather than their defense. So it's almost like a flat +1 to wound for a lot of models that the Orcs are going to be fighting. Things like an Elf that's defense 6 is now going to be wounded on 5s because you're striking at their courage value of 5 instead. So it's really reliable. And when these Orcs are just 6 points, you can put a lot of them on the table. With units like the Spectres that have great courage and the ability to move through terrain really easily, they're going to be able to sit on objectives. The Witch King also has a choice of whether he's on a fell beast or a horse and what other equipment he has, which means that it's going to be really easy to adjust him to any points level. Overall, this is a really well-rounded army list that I think can compete at every single scenario. Number 3 on this list goes to Dale. Now this is an interesting one because the first time I read it, my first impression was it got a bit of a nerf. But then I read a little bit more and I was well and truly incorrect about that. This is a small army list with very limited choices. You've got Girion, Captains of Dale, Warriors of Dale, and the Windlance. Only 4 options. That's really not very many, but they're all just really good options. Firstly, let's talk about why I thought it got nerfed. Girion lost access to his bow, and in the last edition, he could take up to 3 strength 4 shots, which is a lot. Captains also lost their bows, and you're usually taking 3 or 4 captains, so that's just a lot less shooting in your army. But where they lost out on the Captains and Girion, the Windlancers got a massive buff. They were arguably the worst model in the game last edition, so they've got a big buff this edition, working similarly to how the other siege engines work now with a piercing shot. And before we even get to the special rules, you can fit a lot of models in this list. A Warrior of Dale base is 7 points, and they've got to take an upgrade, so they're running at an 8-point minimum. But an Esgaroth bow costs 2 points, so it's a 9-point Warrior of Dale with a strength 3 bow, and you can absolutely hoard these guys out. One of the special rules for this army list gives you a 3+ shoot value, meaning that in the shooting phase, a Warrior of Dale with an Esgaroth bow is equivalent to a High Elf with bow. So very, very good at shooting, and they are a lot cheaper, so you can fit a lot more of them in the list. One of your army's special rules gives you re-roll to hits against monster models. And because this edition we're going to be seeing a lot more monsters because they got a massive buff, that's going to be really, really helpful to counter some of the new lists that people will be playing. You also get +1 courage if you're within line of sight of Girion, and Girion gains a fearless special rule, so you're all covered when it comes to any courage shenanigans. But the most important special rule is the Warriors of Dale will get +1 to wound while they're in their own deployment zone or within 6 inches of a wind lance when making strikes. So that basically means if you just sit back and shoot your enemy and do a ton of damage, they're going to have to run forwards, and when they eventually make it to you, well, now you've got +1 to wound them in combat. That's terrifying. And worst case scenario, if you don't want to be in your deployment zone, you can just carry those wind lances forwards with you. Warriors of Dale are also already just a decent stat line with their fight 4, defense 5, they're pretty good. Now this is going to be more dependent on the scenario. In something like To the Death where there's no objectives and they don't need to come forwards, this is one of the last armies in the game that I want to fight because they're just going to do so much damage from a distance. Whereas something like Hold Ground, they're going to struggle a bit more, but overall I still think that they're really good and deserving of this place in the list. I was really hoping that shooting would get nerfed in this edition because I think it was too powerful last edition, but by all metrics, I think it's probably just as good, if not even better, because some of the things that counter shooting have been nerfed themselves. Before we move into the next thing on the list, I'm really excited to announce that the Kingdom of Noldareth Kickstarter has been fulfilled. That means everyone who backed the Kickstarter has received the STL files. That also means that if you missed out on the Kickstarter and you want to get your hands on the STL files, you can now find them on the Conquest Creations web store or on our My Mini Factory page. The links are in the description down below. By picking up those STL files, you are directly funding what we do here at Conquest Creations, so you're allowing us to make more videos that are better quality. So if you want to get some incredible terrain and support the channel at the same time, then check out the Kingdom of Noldareth. Alright, let's keep going. Number 2 on the list is one that I haven't seen many other YouTubers talking about. It is the Army of the White Hand. Now the Army of the White Hand is effectively Saruman G'ing up the Wildmen before they go and burn the Westfold, and he's sending some Uruk-hai scouts with him. In this army, you must include Saruman, which, don't worry, you're going to want to do that anyway. And then it contains Uruk-hai scouts with a scout captain, the Wildmen with Wildmen chieftains and the Wildmen Oathmaker, Wild Riders, and Crabane, as well as Isengard Orcs and Isengard Orc Captain. So there's a lot of different variety that you can take in this list. The 2 key units here are Grima Wormtongue, who's gotten a lot better this edition. Any model who calls a heroic action within 6 inches of him has to spend 2 might instead of 1, so he's a massive drain on enemy resources. And he's even better because he can move through enemy models now. And the Oathmaker gives a 6-inch fearless bubble to the Wildmen, which means that you're never going to have any courage problems at all. Saruman is also just really good at casting spells and shutting down big heroes. Let's have a look at the special rules that this army gets. You get +1 courage if you're within line of sight of Saruman, that's great. Saruman can draw line of sight from Crabane, so it's really hard to avoid his spells, but the most important one is that Saruman gets 3 spells that you can use once per game that automatically cast. The first one, that is the most dramatic and powerful one, is Conjure Lightning. You can pick a point on the board not within 12 inches of a friendly model, unless it's Grima, because he can deploy with the enemy, and all models within 2 inches of that point suffer a strength 6 hit. Huge. Basically, turn 1 of the game, you drop a bomb in the middle of your opponent's army, do a ton of damage. Now, I've only played this army once, and that was at 850 points, and on turn 1, I killed 8 models with this special rule. It's really powerful. Now, there is some counterplay because, of course, your opponent can spread out as they march towards you, but if they do that, you're still getting value out of it. I think it also gets disproportionately better at lower points, because if you kill 8 models in a 500-point army, that is a really big deal. The next special rule is Galing Wins, which means that your opponent is half movement for everything in their entire army. That's crazy good. Whether you say that for the late game where they're trying to spread out and hit objectives, or in the early game as they're approaching and you're shooting at them, it's very powerful. Especially if you're against all cavalry armies that are going to try to kite you, there's going to be one turn where you can get way closer to them than they were expecting you to. And the last one is Conjure Thunder. I think that's what it's called, something like that. And it gives every model in the enemy army fearful, meaning they have to pass a courage test to charge. So this army list, it has high numbers, it's got good shooting, it's got fantastic maneuverability with the Crebain and the Wild Graders, it's got an ability to deal with big heroes that I think are going to be really, really popular in the game. You've got some fantastic courage. Overall, I think it can do it all. So I'm expecting to see it at the top of some tournaments. Before we get into our first place position, we have a few honorable mentions. And this is where things might get contentious. There's going to be some army lists that you think I've left off, and let me know in the comments which one they are. The first honorable mention, which I will admit is very biased, is Erebor Reclaimed. This is Thorin's company as the champions of Erebor. I've only played a couple of games with it so far, but they've got massive buffs across the board, and they are very, very powerful. Now, if you don't want to play it as just the heroes, you can take Beaufort on the Troll Brute with some Iron Hill Warriors, and I think it's going to be a really, really strong army. It is going to be slow, but yeah, it can't have it all. My next honorable mention is a Battle of 5 Armies. You can take basically just all of the good side of the Hobbit in this one, which means there's a lot of deadly combinations you can bring in. Bjorn's fantastically powerful, same with Gwar here, and you have so many options of taking your favorite champions of Erebor, buffing up your numbers with Survivors of Lake Town. I just think it's going to be good at every scenario and being very well rounded. And the last one is the Muster of Isengard. Now, some people probably think I should have put that in second place instead of the Army of White Hand, but I stand by the Army of White Hand being the best Isengard list. The Muster of Isengard allows you to take Uruk-hai Warriors and Uruk-hai Scouts. It gives you the old Isengard army bonus where you only break at 66% dead instead of 50%, but this time it's properly broken, so it's how I think the rules should have worked last edition. You gain Hatred Man on an already very, very good army list. And on the first turn of the game, all your Uruk-hai captains get a free march, and they can call strike if they want to. So there's just a variety of things in there. Hatred Man in particular is going to be very helpful when you're Strength 4, two-handing with a Fight 5 Uruk-hai Berserker, and then getting Hatred. You're going to get some real serious damage out there. All right, let's go into my pick for first place. And I got to give a shout out to Golem's Gamers before I get into this, because they talked about a 130 player event that happened in the UK, and this one was already high on my list before I saw the results of that tournament that they talked about, and now it's the top of the list, and that is the Eagles. At this tournament that I'm talking about, Eagles were 6 out of the top 10 places in the tournament, which is a little bit crazy. Now, last edition, Eagles were just a fun, fluffy list that was really cool, but ultimately really struggled to win games. And the rules writers have gone the total opposite direction this time. Now they are incredibly powerful. Overall, they're monsters, so all the monsters got buffed, and all the Eagles got dominant, so now they're better at holding objectives and their brutal power attacks are better. Gwar here got a massive buff because he got an extra attack, which is huge, and Heroic Strike getting nerfed means that all those high fight value things are even better than they were before. They created the Fledgling Eagle, which is an eagle that costs 75 points, which makes it really easy for you to play in 500 points or 650 points. Just, you can fit into different points levels better because you have a bit more options with your unit types. Now, the Fledgling Eagles are weaker, but it means you can play at 500 instead of having to go 50 points down if there's a 500-point tournament. All of this is fine, but what puts them on the top of the list? And it is the one special rule they have in their army list. Well, they have two. One of them's plus on strength, not charge. That's great, but that doesn't make the difference. The difference is Piercing Cry. Oh my god, this is terrifying. At the start of the move phase, Gwar here may declare a Piercing Cry, and all enemy models within 6 inches of him cannot move that turn. Flat out, they're frozen. Crazy. Basically, if you're playing this army, the strategy is you need to charge in on a turn where you didn't have priority, so you can pick your fights. On that first turn, you can do whatever you want, whether you just kill stuff, or you barge stuff, or you hurl stuff to knock it over, anything you want. And the next turn, you call the Piercing Cry, and you do it again. And there's very, very little counterplay to that Piercing Cry, so your opponent has to be super careful, needs to leverage terrain if they want to stay safe, which can be very, very challenging. I do think that this army gets a lot weaker on really densely terrained boards, but there's a lot of places where that's not the case. So the Eagles are terrifying. Alright, well that is my list for the top 5 army lists in the new edition of the Middle Earth Strategy Battle Game. What do you think? Do you think I got the top 5 correct? Incorrect? What do you think I should have talked about? Let me know in the comments down below. Once again, if you want to pick up the Kingdom of Noldareth, it massively helps out the channel if you get our terrain and start 3D printing it. My name's been Jacob Lucas, this has been Conquest Creations, and thank you for watching.